At the beginning of the year, I said this. Let me go ahead and start off by saying this video is not sponsored. Vego Gardens didn't send us any of these for free, and we didn't even get a discount. I definitely emailed Vego Gardens and tried to get on their affiliate program, and they didn't email me back. I know, I look homeless in that video, but that's what happens when you spend every dollar you have on raised beds. Here we are almost a full year later, and I finally got that email back. So at the end of this video, if you're still interested in getting a Vego Garden bed, I'm an affiliate now, so there will be a link in the description below. Most of what I have to say is good things about these raised beds. There are a couple things that could be better, and we'll get to that later. Let's get started with the basics. What I have here, this is a 17-inch 10-in-1 Vego Garden raised bed, and this is the modern gray color, I'm pretty sure is what it's called. Now, I went with a 17-inch for two reasons. Number one is I couldn't afford the 32-inch ones, especially when I did 16 raised beds here behind me. But the second reason is the amount of money it would have costed me to fill 16 32-inch raised beds would have been double what I spent on these. That's definitely something to consider when you're looking at getting these beds, is you're gonna have to pay a lot of money to get them filled. A 32-inch bed is a lot of soil. That's an insane amount of soil, especially when you're doing it on a large scale, kind of like I did. But what the 32-inch does help with is if you have some issues with your back, maybe if you're older and you can't get around like you used to, a 32-inch bed is going to be a perfect bed for you because you can stand, it's going to be waist high, you can just kind of work at a level playing field. You don't have to squat down, you don't have to bend over. It's going to help your back out a lot. Now, I will say the 17-inch beds, they did help my back. I'm only 32, so I'm not old by any means. 2 years ago, before I had these beds here, I was working in the ground and I was bent over all day, I was planting. I decided to build this garden when I was planting my garden 2 years ago because it was a lot of work. I was bent over on my hands and knees, digging in the ground, and my back really started to hurt. That's not an issue I ran into this year with these raised beds. Now, these beds and what they're made out of, they're gonna be 100% non-toxic and eco-friendly. You don't have to worry about anything leaching into your bed. A lot of times when people build raised beds out of wood, they're building it with like pressure treated wood, and that's gonna be an issue. You're gonna be leaching stuff into that soil. Even the paint that they use on the outside of these beds, this is a 100% USDA compliant food grade paint, so you really have nothing to worry about when it comes to anything leaching into the soil. The paint combined with the zinc, aluminum, and magnesium, I'm pretty sure that's what, give me just a second, let me double check that. Zinc, magnesium, and aluminum coated steel. So the paint combined with those things, they call it the VZ 2.0. And one cool thing about this VZ 2.0 is it's actually been verified by the Texas A&M National Corrosion and Materials Reliability Lab. So it's completely safe and it's gonna be good for up to 20 years. So when you build these and you put them into your garden, they will be there for 20 years. You don't have to worry about it. Now, when you first get your raised bed, it's gonna come in a box just like this one right here. And I was actually pretty surprised with how small this box is. It is a pretty heavy box, so make sure you have some help carrying it if you can't carry something this heavy. It's pretty heavy. It comes with some instructions, and I will say, when I set these up earlier this year, the instructions were great. I had absolutely no issues whatsoever with the instructions. They helped me out a lot, and honestly, I built the first one, I used the instructions, and then after that, I didn't even look at any of the instructions for the other 15 raised beds we had. All right, now let's get into my first gripe with these. And it's not a very big gripe, just a little one. It's just a little one with the setup. It's nothing crazy, but it is still a gripe. It comes with a rubber, we'll get into the gripe in a second. It comes with a rubber little thing to go around the trim on the outside, and that's just so you don't get cut by that metal on the top if you kind of brush up against it or anything. But the gripe I have is with the hardware. The hardware, it comes with all the hardware you need. It's great. There's so many different types of hardware for this thing. So when you build these, the top two nuts are gonna be acorn nuts, and then after that, they're just normal nuts down the rest of the bed. You have to sort all those out. Like, you know when you get something from IKEA and all the little nuts and bolts and stuff, they come in their own separate packages, so that way you know what goes to what. I wish they would have done that here because it did get kind of difficult. The one thing I wish I did differently when I built all my beds out is I wish that I went through and sorted these out before I started building. It would have saved me so much time. These probably took me 40 minutes each to put together. If I would have sorted out my hardware first, I probably could have gotten each of them done in a half hour or less. Hey, real quick, if you're getting value out of this video, do me a huge favor. Go down, hit the like button, and consider subscribing to my channel. It really helps me out a lot. What this is gonna do is it's gonna tell YouTube that you like the video, and then if I'm lucky, YouTube will send it out to other people who might also like this video. Thank you, I appreciate it. They give you a nice little Vego Garden sticker, and they give you some rods to go across the middle, and this is just to kind of keep it from bowing out, and I'll talk more about these later when I get into kind of the structure of these and how they held up for me throughout the season. The last thing they have, which I'm not gonna pull all of them out, but they have all of the actual metal pieces that go around the outside. They have curved ones and they have straight ones. They have short and long ones, and it definitely helps to put those together in a specific order, and that's one thing that the instructions don't call out, and I wish they did. And I talked about that in my video where I actually set all these up in my initial review. I'm gonna leave a link for that down in the description below. There is a specific way, especially with the 4x8 foot configuration. I don't know, maybe it's just personal preference, but go watch that video after you're done with this video if you're curious about how to put this specific configuration together. It's a really long, in-depth video. I spent a lot of time on it, so go watch that when you're done here. All right, let's talk about filling these bad chickens up. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but it's gonna be expensive, like really expensive to fill these up. If I would have went with a bagged soil from, like, let's say Lowe's, I would have spent more money filling these up than I did actually buying these raised beds, and these raised beds aren't cheap. There's a couple things you can do to make that cheaper. Let's talk about it. One thing you can do is you can add logs into the bottom of your raised beds, and the logs are gonna be kind of somewhat like a hugelkultur type deal. It's not exactly hugelkultur. I don't know if you know what hugelkultur is, but you put the logs in the bottom of your raised beds and it's gonna help take up space. So we put a bunch of old, dead logs that we had, and dead branches and leaves and twigs and all sorts of stuff are sitting in the bottom of these raised beds. We are gonna have some settling, and we already have. When we first set these up at the beginning of the year, these raised beds were filled to the top. Now they're a few inches down, but that's okay because I'm just gonna add more compost at the beginning of the season. I definitely don't recommend going out and buying bagged soil to fill these up with. That is just way too expensive. What we did is we did a 50-50 mixture between premium topsoil and compost. So we found a guy here locally and we were able to order premium topsoil from him. The other 50% was compost. So same guy did the same thing, came here, dropped it off. We had to mix that by hand. That was very, very labor intensive, but it saved us, no, I'm not even kidding, literally thousands of dollars. I did a whole video on that. There will be a link in the description below that you can go watch when you're done with this video. But don't go out and buy bagged soil. It gets so expensive so fast, and you can just build your own soil. You don't have to use the bag stuff. Now let's talk about growing and watering. How well did everything grow in these raised beds? How much did we have to water it? Because they're metal, they're gonna get hot, right? Those are all things that I thought about before I ordered these. I was worried about the soil I was putting in. I was worried about the water retention. I was worried about a whole lot of different things. So let's kind of talk about those things that I was worried about. This year, our garden provided us with more food than it ever has. Every single bed did great. It produced us with an abundance of food. We even had a hard time keeping up with preserving it all and eating it all, especially with this darker color that we have here. I was worried about the heat retention and how fast that water would evaporate out. So that was kind of my initial thought on why I wanted the drip system to go through each bed. So I put the drip system in before we even planted this year, so that way I could really control the water and set it on a timer if I needed to. And I will say, when we very first got everything planted and they were seedlings, this drip system didn't keep up with it. And at that point I was a little bit worried. I was like, oh man, these beds are just gonna dry out. This is terrible. So I was worried, but realistically all it was is the root systems of these little plants, they weren't established yet. They weren't stretching out and they weren't able to get to that water that was coming out of these drip systems. And so I had to come out here a few times a week and just hand water, which is totally fine. And honestly, that's not any different than what I was doing in ground. But I will say, as soon as those plants were established and everything was actually growing, I didn't really have to come out here all that often. There was a few plants that had different watering needs than what I was giving everything else. So I would have to come out and water those. But for the most part, I set my water on a timer. I forgot about it. I didn't have to worry about it. I did look at the Vego Garden website and I forgot exactly what the technology is called, but they did put some thought and effort into what these were made out of and the reflectivity, hopefully that's what it's called. But the reflectiveness of these raised beds is made in a way that it purposely doesn't soak up all that heat and dry out too quickly. It will dry out faster than an in-ground bed, and that just kind of goes along with any raised bed, not just these ones. But these don't dry out any quicker than a normal raised bed would. I was actually pretty impressed with that. There was minimal effort on my part to keep everything watered. In the first video I made about these raised beds, I talked about how I didn't like how easily they would scratch. That's not something that's changed. I still think that these scratch too easily, and I wish they did a better job at the scratch resistance of these. When we were putting these together, every time we would overlap the two pieces to put the screws in, we would scratch it up. Just those two pieces rubbing together, it would make them scratch, and I didn't like that. Since posting that video, I did get some comments and some feedback from some people that I think is pretty constructive, and I want to share it with you. They were talking about how they left the plastic on while they were putting the pieces together, and then after they had it all assembled and put together, then they pulled that plastic off. I feel like that's that's a good way to go if you're gonna build these. The instructions don't call that out. I don't even know what Vego Garden thinks about this one way or the other. But what we did is we removed that plastic first, we overlapped them, and as we were overlapping them, it scratched more than I wanted it to. I will say though, let me say this, since putting these beds where they're at now, every single one of these beds, they've been here all year. I don't think we have a single new scratch since putting them here. I think the biggest issue we've run into, let me show you. This right here is probably the most damage we have to any of the raised beds we have out here, but it was specifically because we used a tractor to load these beds, and the bucket came down and hit that. So that guy hit with the tractor, and that's all that happened. So I would say that the durability is there. They don't scratch quite as easily as I initially thought they would. Another thing I was worried about is the sides of the beds bowing out. I have another metal raised bed, and I'm not gonna name the company, but I have another one, and it's bowed out over time. And honestly, it was like halfway through the first year it started bowing out. If I'm spending this much on a raised bed, I don't want it to bow, right? I want those rods in the middle to work like they should. And I will say, nothing is bowed at all. And we really put these to the test when we were filling them, because we filled it with a tractor and we were kind of jumping on them. And if we're gonna do damage, we're gonna do it then. All 16 of my beds, they all look brand new. Besides the part where my friend hit it with the tractor, they all look brand new. We've been out here with the kids, we've been out here with wheelbarrows, we've been out here with wagons, we've been out here with the dogs jumping in and around, jumping up into the beds even though they shouldn't be, jumping up into the beds. We've had a lot of traffic through here, a lot of machines through here, and these beds still look brand new. So the durability is there, and I do believe that these are gonna last 20 plus years. You might end up with a couple scratches, so I will say that. You might end up with some scratches, and that's just something that I'm okay with. I would much rather have scratches on my beds than have to rebuild them every couple of years because they're wood. All right, so who are these raised beds for and who are they not for? Because I don't think they're for everybody. These are definitely gonna be for a very serious gardener, somebody who plans on gardening for years and years and years to come, and it's not just something that you're just starting now and just getting into, because this is an investment. If you're just starting getting into gardening, I would definitely recommend, instead of jumping into something like this, maybe start in ground and see if it's something that you actually like before investing in something like this. These beds are absolutely for somebody that is older, somebody with back problems, somebody that can't get on their hands and knees and work down at the ground level anymore, especially those 32-inch beds. Those 32-inch beds are amazing. These are definitely for somebody that just wants a beautiful garden, they want a more modern looking garden, and they have that expendable income to spend on it. And I will say that these are for somebody that maybe isn't planning on moving anytime soon, because if you spend all that money on these beds, you get them you get your whole garden set up, and then you move. Technically, I guess you could put in the work and rip them out of the ground and bring them with you, but that's a lot of work. So if you're planning on staying where you're at for a long time, these are a great option. Now, who are these not for? Because these aren't for everybody. If you're looking to just start being more self-sufficient, you want to get into gardening, but you want to do it on a budget, these aren't for you. Don't buy these, please. And like I touched on earlier, these aren't for somebody that is planning on moving anytime soon. If you're planning on moving soon, don't buy these unless you have the manpower and the willpower to dig them back up when you make that move so you can bring them with you. But at the end of the day, do I regret buying these? Not even a little bit.